Hey guys, how's it going? It's the Ocarina coming at you with another gaming video from my room, because sadly there's still no conventions. Tomorrow I actually go back to work, so I want to get this video out before the weekend happened. I don't know if I did, I don't know if I got it right at the mark, who knows, but here it is regardless. So yeah, I go back to work June 1st, but I wanted to do a video that recently kind of had to do with like a recent meme. I mean, I'll go ahead and read the meme here. It's actually from Twitter, and I saw a lot of my friends posting it. It's from Jake Regal on Twitter. It says, what were the 5 most important video games to you throughout your youth/teen years? No curating to look cool/interesting. Well, as you guys know, I'm a huge Nintendo fan, if that wasn't a big giveaway. I mean, you saw my streams, you've seen my streams, you've seen my other videos, you've seen like the passion I have for Nintendo. So of course, I'm sure you would assume that most of mine are from Nintendo, and you're absolutely right. But when I sat down and actually thought about it and, got everything, started making a list, started typing out stuff in terms of like reasons why, thoughts, everything like that, I kind of came to the conclusion that 5 is not enough. 5 was just not enough. I had to do 10. There was 10 games that were like my all-time favorite, inspirational, like important to me in my teen years and my youth, and everything you see before here. The reason why I say I had to do 10 was not because the top 10, I know everybody on YouTube and their freaking mother does that, but it's just gaming is such a huge passion of mine. It's like literally one of the things that in life that I've always loved since as far back as I can remember. Literally the first memories I ever have in my entire life are playing a video game. Like, that is the first memory I have as far back as I can remember. So I mean, it was the first video game I ever personally experienced. But like I said, we'll get into all of that stuff later. So that's kind of what I want to talk about today. It's going to be a list, a top 10 instead of a top 5, because I just feel like 5 was unfair to just my mental health and just to the games that were there for me in general throughout my lifetime. So anyway, guys, let's go ahead and do the top 10 right now. Let me start off with saying I'll be old. I was born in '88, so I had a 90s childhood and early to mid 2000s teenage time. Yeah, that sounds about right. One of the biggest and baddest in gaming world, in the early 90s anyway, was Super Mario Bros. 3. To this day, this is still one of my all-time favorite games in the history of gaming. In terms of industry influence, it was one of the series trendsetters for like a lot of reasons. For one, the airship level theme has been used in several recent titles, like of course New Super Mario Bros. Deluxe for the Switch. It's been used in Mario Galaxy. You can hear it in some cases in 3D Land for the 3DS. Same thing with Toad's house theme. It's also used in several games and spin-offs. I hear that all the time. Paper Mario. I'm pretty sure it was. Yeah, I think it was also used in New Super Mario Bros. Deluxe. But yeah, those like just soundtrack examples. Those songs have been around forever, and they were all originally from Super Mario Bros. 3. This was the first title where we also met the Koopalings as boss characters, and they've been a series staples ever since. They're in Mario parties, they're in Mario Kart, they're in Smash Brothers. And the reason this game was so big to me was that it was the first game I ever saw like hype and marketing for it on TV. I remember seeing trailers and commercials as a kid during summer and Christmas time specifically, because back in the 90s you had no internet, you had to like re-release commercials around specific times. And by then I've already experienced Super Mario Bros. 1 and 2, and 3 took the franchise to a whole nother level. Mario could fly for one, and that was insane. Kids didn't actually believe that until they played it themselves and actually experienced that for themselves. I remember people were like, what, Mario flies? No, not in what? He's never flown before. I mean, Peach could kind of do it in Super Mario Bros. 2, but the Leaf made it feel like more legit. Like, you were able just to run, jump, get a whole lot of distance, even go off screen, go off map or whatever, and then slowly descend down. It was awesome, dude. Back in the day, that was amazing. That was just crazy to us. And of course, there's that battle mode when you're in multiplayer. I don't know if you guys remember it, but when you guys went across the same icon and selected A, Mario and Luigi can battle it out, and of course the winner would go next. They would get, if it was somebody else's turn, you could have stole it basically. I mean, it's the first ever trolling I ever experienced as a gamer. At sleepovers, we did not settle it in Smash, we settled it in Super Mario Bros. 3. Later on, fight games were part of the 16-bit era, of course the arcade era, but man, Super Mario Bros. 3 fights were like a fond memory at the time. And the game itself was fun. It felt more clean in terms of controls. I remember I felt 3 seemed nicer in terms of jumps, and the raccoon tail descent gave more control of my landing, so that was nice. Now it feels kind of like a slippery mess, but I still prefer it over the other two in terms of, like, I guess you could say smooth controls and whatnot. And then later they remade this game for the SNES Mario All-Stars release. I don't know if you guys remember that, but it was kind of like a collection of the franchise up till now. And it added voices to the GBA port. The GBA got the SNES version, and they made Luigi look more like Luigi, which was nice. But having that voiceover definitely felt like that was like the epitome of Super Mario Bros. 3. If I had to pick a favorite, I would say the Super Mario Bros. 3 GBA version was my favorite. And of course, the soundtrack was super memorable. I've already touched on some points on that. You know, the gameplay, the mini story, of course, were all unforgettable. I mean, everybody remembers traversing to the different worlds, you know, seeing the different types of landscapes, kind of have different zones. And to this day, I'm so glad that I've lived through the relevancy to watch Nintendo become the powerhouse, you know, that it is today from way back then, from like the beginning. You know, of course, not to mention the corny cartoon show that is still used for memes today. But yeah, man, Super Mario Bros. 3 was indeed a gem of the 8-bit era, and one of the games I purchased the most in my lifetime. Maybe not the most purchased, but definitely one of the most purchased games. I mean, this is including digital versions, re-getting, you know, the physical copy back in the day as many times as I could. Sometimes my cousin stole it, or friends took it, or whatnot. It's just something, sometimes we found it at a pawn shop. I don't know, just, it was always bought. But yeah, I mean, if it's available for your platform, though, I will own it some way, somehow. But anyway, guys, let's get on to number 9. I remember very fondly the 16-bit era being born. I mean, I played the SNES Super Mario World at friends and family's house, seeing the TV ads for Donkey Kong, Link to the Past, Mario Kart, etc. I'm still in love with my, at the time I was still in love with my NES, and as I had, you know, the games like Punch-Out, all the Mario games, Pro Wrestling. My mom rented games regularly for me, but you know, the first time I ever experienced Nintendo having competition was at my grandma's house, as my aunt had a Sega with the first Sonic the Hedgehog game. The concept was simple, you know, you were a mascot character, you went left, jumped on things, which was to some really catchy music. Sonic had really catchy soundtrack, not gonna lie. You know, similar stuff to Mario. But, you know, you ran fast. That was the big difference, is you were way faster than Mario ever was. And as much as this current gen of children like to take the credit for, hey, Sonic, gotta go fast, I will be the first to tell you that it was something that we started in the 90s. Back in the 90s neighborhoods and the 90s playgrounds, gotta go fast was a saying that, you know, the community had since like the beginning. And it only became, you know, canon after the Sonic X theme. Sonic 1 was by definition the first game I ever beaten from start to finish, but for some reason it just didn't really capture me. I mean, it just didn't really, like, I don't know, resonate. It was a fun game, I enjoyed it, and I was like, oh, okay, cool, but I was still like, I like Nintendo better, I like their games better. But for my 6th birthday, my mom found someone selling their Sega Genesis for like $50, and it came with Sonic the Hedgehog 2. It was in the newspapers and the classified ads, and for some reason I was hooked on it. Like, she got it for me, that was my 6th birthday present, and I just loved it. It was, you know, so fun. I thought it was way better than Sonic 1. I don't know if it was just like, you know, I remember seeing ads for this one too, like seeing Michael Jordan, Michael Jackson, Tupac, you know, all these like big celebrities, you know, being shown playing Sonic 2, like Sonic the Hedgehog 2, they were playing it. So, and it advertised it so hard, I felt like it was the must-have game, I guess. All these big 90s stars were playing it, so it obviously had to be legit. So, I mean, when I finally got it, it felt crazy awesome to me. I mean, I remember playing it, loving it. Just, I remember hooking it up to, at the time, like my stepdad's mom's house. I remember hooking it up to her TV and just thinking it was the best. I mean, I really remember loving the special stages and the song that it came with. and this was one of the first games I ever experienced co-op with, which is kind of like why it kind of like it stuck to me really well. Like it was one of the more important things. I was just like, holy crap, this is amazing, this is mind-blowing, this is something I have never seen before, because the second controller was able to control Tails, the fox, Miles Tails Prower. And seeing the player 2 option like this was just like I said, mind-blowing. 2 people on one screen. Holy crap, co-op was pretty much for me born and witnessed at that exact same moment, because you are just there playing the same game. Player 2 had infinite lives, which again was crazy. Never heard of or seen of in a video game. They could take all the damage in the world. And of course, like I said before and a million times, the soundtrack, well, the first one was great, but the second one, I just thought it was a lot. I felt overall more like just, I don't know, catchy, clean, a lot more memorable, I guess you could say. The game itself was, a little bit more smooth and polished than the original. Still had its problems, still had its flaws. As you can see from the gameplay I was playing earlier that I got for this video, I was still kind of struggling with a lot of it. So, but back then I feel like I was better at the game. I had that muscle memory of I guess you could say, the physics, versus now. I haven't played it in like almost over a decade, so it's definitely, I'm a little rusty at it. Also being able to play, a Sonic game with someone else, because you did have the option to play just as Tails, and it was cute, and it kind of just felt like a new game almost. It was the exact same game, but it felt different. So that was kind of like my first time I've ever experienced playing a different character that isn't the main character, like someone who wasn't designed as player 1. You were able to choose playing player 2. But I was high-key salty that you couldn't fly with him until Sonic 3. The Dr. Robotnik theme, I remember that one. The game made the fight seem more serious and dangerous, and the inclusion of Super Sonic was awesome. But, I used the cheat codes for that, and I'm not going to lie, I never could get all the Chaos Emeralds at age 6. And this was the first time I ever saw Metal Sonic, which was pretty unforgettable. He's kind of been a series staple for a long time as well. He was phase 1 of the final boss level, and, the end game had that final theme as well that kind of stuck with me at the very end. I don't know what it was about, but I kind of felt like it was so epic and satisfying, like a happy, proud yes, but also kind of bittersweet sad. It was too much emotion for an 8-year-old to process, and yes, it did take me 8 years to beat that game. Not 8 years, sorry, 2 years. I was 8 years old, I got it at 6, it took me 2 years to beat it. My math good. Okay, and this is the first time I've ever owned a 16-bit, gaming console. And I had a few other games, but they were overall forgettable compared to Sonic the Hedgehog 2. But except Street Fighter 2, I had Street Fighter 2. But come on, man, Guile's theme was a meme, that I feel like our generation made, and it's been a meme ever since. So, like, Street Fighter, of course, was also unforgettable. I never owned Sonic 3 or Sonic and Knuckles until like the GameCube port collection version, and those games were really great, and I loved them, and they were awesome. And I rented them a few times in the 90s as well, but since I didn't actually play, experience, own, and beat them, it wasn't that big of a heavy hitter for me. They were great, and I did like them better than Sonic 2, but since I've kind of met some other games on the list before I actually finished those 2 games, they just get honorable mentions. But yeah, I was a bigger fan of Sonic the Hedgehog 2. It was just such a groundbreaking experience for me. It was my first fully owned, spent a lot of time with it, 16-bit era game. And at the time, like I said, I had a Sega. I never got a Super Nintendo until later. And it was just the game that kind of, to me, is like the 16-bit era mascot. That game and Super Mario World, sorry, were like the two they were unanimous. When I think 16-bit era, those are the first 2 games that popped into my head. But anyway, guys, we're gonna still gonna obviously hover around the 90s. So let's go ahead and get into the late 90s era, and I'll give you my number 8 top game. In the 80s and 90s, the cyberpunk was not just a genre, but an entire aesthetic, apparently. And though my neighborhood and a few of the neighbor kids had the Super Nintendo version of Star Fox 64 having the full on voice acting was shattering to me. This was the first game I ever experienced that had all that full voice acting dialogue and not just text like, you know, all previous games before it. Some games here and there, like in this SNES Sega series, kind of had like a voice, a quote every now and then, but this was the first game from start to finish. If there was text on the screen, they were talking it in full voice acting, which, you know, it was awesome. It was legit. And of course, the full 3D graphics were amazing. You know, a sci-fi game, a sci-fi shooter, you know, getting really cool dogfights. I mean, the Super Nintendo version didn't really impress me. It just felt kind of clunky and like weird and unintuitive. I really didn't like it. You know, I was just like, I'll stick to Donkey Kong and Mario and stuff that like look nicer and make more sense to me. I wasn't into the whole polygon thing. But yeah, this was the first time I felt like, you know, for that era, like, this is it. This is the modern era of gaming. There was no going back after this. We're only going forward from here. Like, you know, this made me think, wow, the future is now, man. Like, video games have changed forever. This is it. It just, oh my God. Like, I can't even explain it. Like, just the thought of like being a, you know, that kid, that 8-9-year-old kid, and feeling this and experiencing this, like, is this real life? Like, it was crazy. And of course, this set the game for all for all modern Star Fox games in general. And sadly, Nintendo hasn't been able to make a game this awesome since then. I mean, Star Fox 64 takes 2 hours to beat, like, tops. And yet, it having multiple routes, multiple planets to see, the different side characters you can encounter, that, you know, new Fox or Falco, like Cat and Bill, and, you know, being able to play those guys, well, not play those guys, but have them on your team for like 2 levels was really cool. And seeing the fact, I remember trying to get all the freaking different planets to see if any new side characters would show up. And then, of course, this was one of the first games that I have ever experienced 2 different endings for. Not only did you have multiple routes, but you had like 2 different endings. It was kind of like a true ending and like a oh dang, try again ending. So this is the first time I've ever experienced that. So this is kind of another reason why it just stuck to me so hard. And then what made unforgettable to me as well, besides the 2 multiple endings, that on the quote-unquote true ending, Fox's dad, James McCloud, was there. And it was like the proudest moment of my 8-year-old life when I found him. First thing I did was show my stepdad. He didn't believe it. I told him it was true. I was like, you got to see this. It's awesome. And then, of course, none of my friends believed it. And then, you know, I showed it to them. And it just made me feel so cool because I was the only one who knew how to do it. And even they were asking their friends, their family, and nobody knew how to do it except me. I was the only one. And I kept that secret till to this very day. I have not told a single one of them how I did it. Or, like, you know, I just kind of kept it. Until we're into later generations and forgot about it, I still kept it. It was just a secret I never gave away. And I mean, I'm sure later on they might have figured it out and read it up or something like that. I don't know, most of them aren't into video games by my age nowadays. They're usually got family, kids, blah, blah, blah. And of course, the soundtrack from this game has been remixed and released for several newer games. You know, it's a classic. Everything about this game, the soundtrack, the gameplay, you know, the story, everything, it just rocked my socks off. And it was just, honestly, the peak of the franchise. And then the only thing that did just as good, or to me was even better, was the updated 3DS version. That, you know, they remixed the soundtrack, they redid the voice acting, they redid the graphics, they modernized it, and it felt great, and it was awesome to see. And sadly, the franchise has never been able to match the greatness of this one. Star Fox 64 still remains one of the best Nintendo games ever, and the best in the franchise by a long shot. And it was one of the games that I made a point to beat every day during the summer of having it. It was one that even none of my 64 guys, like my 64 crew, could forget, because, you know, we had the multiplayer, and, you know, we played against each other on the weekends or during the summer, and it was just, you know, a good time. Of course, I was really good at it. And it was the shortest, like, Nintendo 64 game ever, but yet it was so memorable, so iconic, and just so great. And that being said, this game had some great one-liners and references that are still used in pop culture today. I mean, don't believe me? Google the phrase "do a barrel roll" and tell me what happens. I mean, this game also came with the Rumble Pack, which is the first time I've ever experienced, you know, a rumble feature on the controller. And though it's an industry standard now, it brought so much depth and realism to the experience back then, you know, like for like a boss fight explosion. And then it was just like, wow. It was so immersive to me. I mean, being a kid and feeling that shake from the explosion was like, what the freak, this is great and awesome. And of course, in the late 90s, the original Star Wars releases in theaters. And of course, space battles were obviously a thing back then, and we were able to see it. And this is the closest thing we had for like a space battle until like Rogue Squadron actually came out, which was at the end of the Nintendo 64 life cycle. But this game was so great to me, and this was honestly my favorite sci-fi game until like Metroid Prime came along. But I was already adult when I was able to play Metroid Prime Trilogy, and of course this video is for teenagers and kids, so I mean, Metroid Prime does get an honorable mention, but Star Fox 64 for the longest time was my top all-time favorite sci-fi game, and it's definitely the top Star Fox game of all time, and it's just one of Nintendo's greatest of all time, just because it had the multiple routes, it had the multiple side characters, and of course it had the multiple endings, and that was like the first time I've ever experienced that, as well as first time experiencing full voice acting in a game. But anyway, let's keep on going on with this generation with number 7 here in a bit.
It's me, Mario. Hello.
Now, I know it's cliche to say this, or maybe even have this one on the list, but let's be honest, one of the biggest and timeless releases of all times and of all of gaming had to be Super Mario 64. It was, of course, the first ever Nintendo 64 game I've played, as it was a release title. A damn good one, by the way. I'm still amazed to this day that it was a release title. And it was for many others. I mean, it was, first ever Nintendo 64 game, or just, I guess you could say, third generation in general experience for most of us, at least from the 90s perspective. I mean, now in the SNES release, the games felt very similar to the NES. I mean, most of them were platformers, and besides that, they had a few more pixels, a few more color palettes, a bit more accuracy in terms of like how the cartoony characters looked. And the games overall played the same. I mean, so as a kid, I felt like we didn't see much of a difference, from the NES days. I mean, the NES still had a great library, and kids were never upset when you went to their house and all they had was a NES. I mean, that was just like, oh, hell yeah, it's video games, it's video games, it's video games. Like, sure, we, kind of noticed that other games, other consoles had, games others didn't. We grasped the concept of exclusives, but the games all played so similarly between the generations, and there was like such a slight difference in the look. Nobody had any complaints, no matter what generation you had, the first or second. If there was a sleepover and you had one of them, you were awesome. That's just how it was. But however, the Nintendo 64 was just a major game changer. It had huge graphical upgrade, huge graphical difference. And this was the first time, we're ever going to have, like, I guess, 3D gaming as a Nintendo experience. I mean, yeah, we had the Sega Saturn, and I think the PS1 did come out before that, but like in the States, Nintendo was the brand, Nintendo was the name, and it was the first time most of us, if not all of us, experienced 3D gaming for the first time. At least I know it was when I was around. I mean, but who played the Sega Saturn, am I right? But yeah, Super Mario 64 rocked my socks off. I mean, hearing those words even for the first time, going, "It's a me, a Mario," like it literally cemented that phrase is like cemented in like an entire generation's mind, and an entire subculture, and most of pop culture will not hear that phrase and not know where it's from and who said it. It became one of the most timeless quotes of like all of entertainment history, and having the first ever like interactive menu that you were able to pull on Mario's face and grab his ear, grab his nose, extend it. And that was an awesome and impressive tech demo of what the Nintendo 64 can do and what it was capable of. And the fact that, if you found it on your own, which I did, was such a huge treat. And it just was like, wow, this is what video games can do. This is great. This is awesome. I love it. But of course, that face pulling thing is still used in modern memes today, and it's been over 20 years since that game released, and it's still a meme to this day. And this is just the main menu I'm talking about. I haven't even gone over like the games yet, like the playthrough. We haven't even selected our save file yet. I mean, this was the first time I've ever heard, Princess Toadstool being referred to as Peach. and King Koopa being referred to as Bowser. I'm aware that the SNES version had that, but I did not own it, and when I was playing, it was usually just levels people have already beat. I never got to experience the story for myself. Most of the map was already filled out, and I was just playing the levels, baby. But yeah, I mean, but this was kind of like a big deal to me, and I was low-key salty that a simple name change did not sit well with me, but you know, I was over it pretty quickly. And at the end, the franchise still kind of occasionally refers to them as, you know, Peach or Princess Toadstool and Bowser, the King of the Koopas, or King Koopa. And I got over it. I was just like, eh. But yeah, hearing Mario have a voice for the first time was what made me realize that this generation of gaming is going to be different. I mean, not only the 3D graphics, but hearing Mario. I mean, he didn't have a lot of talking roles or at all. He just said a few phrases here and there, which kind of was similar to other games. So like, you didn't get the full voice acting. You know, when you spoke to Toad, he still had the text. You know, Princess Toadstool, aka Peach, did actually say something, you know, in the beginning. So that was kind of cool. But I mean, just hearing Mario like have his, when he moved, when he punched, when he kicked, when he jumped, he said he had some kind of voice. So of course, that was like, wow, like, holy crap, this took my breath away. But yeah, this kind of like put me into the fact that we were in a next generation. Not as impactful, you know, as much as say Star Fox 64 had, but it was still the first time I've ever experienced this to this extent. I mean, I had a joystick and the camera rotated around me almost at a full 360 degrees, but the fact that, you know, I was in a 3D environment, a 3D world, and had a camera rotating around me was also like, wow, I can see the world. I can see, I'm not just seeing one flat screen, I see it all. This camera has options. I can have different angles. This is crazy. I will no longer just have to go to the left anymore. Is this real life? What is real life? Like, I was questioning like my sanity at that, of seeing that for the first time. I was able to see Peach's castle. It's actually here. This is what it looks like. Oh my god. And like, this is just like stepping outside, leaving the tunnel. I haven't even gone like into Babam Fields yet. But when I actually went to my first level, you know, again, earth-shattering. This is my first sandbox game as well, which probably why it's like so impactful to me. And at the time, this was the biggest world I've ever seen. It was massive. It was enormous. First time playing a 3D game, I was just like, it was so free. I was open. I didn't even know what the objective was. I didn't even care. I think, oh yeah, I had to go to the top of the mountain for something. Yeah, sure, I see it. But oh my god, let me look around. I have no idea what the heck to do. I was like, Goombas are in 3D. So are the coins. And then later on, I was like, holy crap, I can shoot out of a cannon. What is this? Is this an actual Mario game? Like, so much changed in the franchise. Like, this is so different from any Mario game I've ever played. It was so... It was just so hard for me to process this. Like, I mean, I was having fun. I loved it. I was hooked on gaming. I mean, I loved video games. You know, they were great. But it was no longer just a toy anymore. You know, playing video games was like, okay, this is like a toy. You know, no different than my action figures. That's how it was for most of us kids. You know, it's just, oh yeah, video game, just another toy. But it finally reached the level of entertainment that I didn't think was possible. Like, I was starting to see them as like movies, cartoons, like. So like, I knew I would grow out of toys, but I knew I would never grow out of TV because, you know, the adults in my life still watch TV. Sure, we watch different things, but I'd say this is when I finally turned into one of those kids that would rather just be like, you know, playing video games inside than playing outside. I was like, oh, you know what? I'm 8, 9. I've played a lot outside. I mean, I've done a lot of that. I don't want to miss out what the Nintendo 64 has to offer, what this Mario World has to offer. And I felt this generation took gaming more seriously, and it wanted to appeal to the vast market rather than just kids. I mean, again, this was the generation that, you know, brought us Resident Evil, you know, stuff like that. Our first M-rated games were starting to come out. Silent Hill, you know, Duke Nukem, Doom, like all that stuff. Like, you know, the 90s was like, okay, gaming is starting to grow up with us. And, you know, of course, I'll get into other games this gen later, besides the ones I just mentioned, because, you know, a few other games made that list. But I would say this generation, no doubt, and this game specifically sealed the deal on making me a gamer. That this was the first time I ever felt like gaming was like I said, more of an art form rather than just a toy. It was something that people made seriously. Like, wow, like they really worked on an experience. Like they really wanted to like wow us as consumers. And Mario 64 no doubt set the industry standard for not only the franchise, but like of all of gaming. Everybody after that were making 3D platformers similar, if not almost exactly the same as Super Mario 64. And this is just a release title. And like, not to mention, you know, like most of the early Mario franchises, it had an unforgettable soundtrack. Like, you know, Koji Kondo, man. I don't know how he did it back then, but like, he just freaking rocked it in terms of like video game Nintendo soundtracks. Like, we're all still singing and humming, and all of it just, it's like ingrained in our minds now from this point forward, especially in his early days. Sadly, nowadays he doesn't really compose, he just kind of puts his stamp on it, which kind of sucks. But anyway, that's another video entirely. I mean, of course, a lot of the jams from Super Mario 64 are remixed into newer games today, and I cannot express enough the impact this game had on me. I mean, it's in my top 10 video of youthful games, and it would obviously still be in my top 10 best gaming videos of all time if and when I make that video. Honestly, it can be its own hour in-depth video about what this game did for me as a gamer, and you know what it did for me as a Nintendo fan. It's just wow. Like, honestly, like going back and like getting the gameplay footage for this, like I just remembered just the feelings I had and like how great and amazing seeing all this was for the first time. And the 3DS version that later came out was also pretty good. It was kind of nice to like relive that classic with new characters from the franchise. Like, you were able to play Super Mario 64 as Yoshi, Luigi, Wario. You added new stages, new areas, more stars, more boss fights, everything like that. I mean, that was still within my teen years, so being able to play that game on the go was also great. But the first Mario 64, like I said, could be its own video about what it did for me as a child. And it was definitely like one of the most impactful games of my youth. I mean, I honestly kind of wanted to, it struggled for me to like not put it in the top 5, but as great as this game was, there were just other games that, you know, just stuck with me and like had a harder impact on me like longer down the road. But anyway, I think I've discussed Super Mario 64 enough. I can go on and on about this game, but let's go ahead and get on to number 6, shall we? Now, most people assume this would be on my list, of course, as I am rather a pretty big, well-known Legend of Zelda fan amongst my circle. And I know some of you will wonder, why is this not in the top 5? It's Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. You talk about this all the time and how it's one of your top games, but this was such a hard list to make in terms of like, because it's pertaining more to my youth and to my teenage years. And I had to admit that in terms of almost impactful to me, other games stood out in terms of that, like which games were the most impactful and for what reasons, and like how amazed or taken away I was by it. However, this is not a top 10 video games of all time list, because yeah, this would definitely be higher than the number 6 position it currently is in now. But when I was younger, I didn't get to play this game much, as I did not own it personally. I had several friends that did. I mean, but because at the time I had no interest in like the fantasy stuff, like Dungeons, Dragons, Wizards, Knights, Magic. I was all like sci-fi fanboy back then. Power Rangers, Star Fox, Star Wars. I remember The Fifth Element, that being one of my favorite childhood movies. Like, it was just, that was it. That was like futuristic. Cyberpunk was the way to go. Like I said before, the 80s and 90s, cyberpunk was an aesthetic. When I was 18, I was finally able to purchase and play video games on my own, because I was in the military. I was stationed out in Hawaii. And I thought, you know what, man, a Nintendo 64 sounds great. I mean, I get it. I was 18, but I'm still a teen. I was still young. I still had that 18-year-old mentality. I just graduated high school, like not even like 3-4 months ago. So like I still feel like I was pretty young. And then this game had to be mentioned. And no, I did beat and play this game like in the like right after I beat the first Gears of War, which was, you know, at the time one of the first HD games you can purchase, and boy, it was impressive at the time. Like seeing HD graphics, seeing all that awesomeness, you know, and that much like nitty gritty actiony stuff for a video game console, like with amongst graphics, was amazing. But yet this game still stood out to me as like, I guess technically a legal adult, but still as like a late teenager. Like this game just freaking held its ground, and I could not stop playing it for the life of me. It was just so awesome, so great, and I just loved it. I mean, we'll get into more details in a bit, but let me tell you like how it impressed me as a kid before as I tell you how it impressed me as a legal adult, but still a teenager. As a kid, this was just like such a standout game, and it just impressed the hell out of me in general because one, it was way bigger than Super Mario 64. It was a whole world and areas where you traversed and, you know, were like, okay, to get to the dungeon, to get to the fire temple, you got to go up the mountain. To, you know, to get to the water temple and help out, you know, go to the Jabu Jabu stage, you had to walk to Hyrule Field and go to, you know, Lake Hyrule and everything like that. You had to go see the Zoras at the Zora domain, stuff like that. Like, I mean, you had to go to your locations and traverse the world. There was no jumping in pictures. You know, you were in the world. You were in it. You were playing it. And, you know, you didn't have a hub worlds to explore other big worlds. Like, you were there. It was just, to me, the most open, beautiful, picturesque, like, this is modern gaming. This is it. This was happening. like you know, Nintendo 64 didn't have any load times. They were cartridges, so like it was just like instantaneous. Like sure, you would get like a little minor like scene where you're like kind of walking off to the distance, but like a couple seconds later you were right there where you needed to be. You know, levels, dungeons, they were all connected to each other over the large overworld. And this, to me, like as a kid, like this was just like, what? Like, I didn't care about the dungeons, the temples, and everything. I just wanted to see. I wanted to explore. I wanted to go to places. I wanted to see what it had to offer. Like, I just kind of wanted to just spend time in this virtual world. And that was the first time I've ever experienced it. I know for this generation, Skyrim's kind of the game that kids lean on for that. Or, like, a lot of newer gamers kind of lean on for that. Because technically that game did come out in 2011. That was almost like 10 years ago now. But yeah, no, that game... For us, for the 90s kids, Ocarina of Time was that game. You know, I just wanted to explore. Of course, I beat the Great Deku Tree, and then, you know, I knew, like, I needed to get some items to, like, be able to explore the world better. So, I mean, I had to go and beat a few dungeons. You know, obviously, I wanted to leave the forest and explore Hyrule Field as quickly as I can. But, you know, as a kid, that kind of, like, was the reasons why. It's just like, wow, for the first time ever, I just feel like I'm in a larger-than-life world, and it is amazing. Now... I'm kind of glad I was able to, like, I waited to, like, be a legal adult to be able to play this game. You know, I was able to actually buy it, own it, appreciate it myself for that reason. And, of course, so this being my first fantasy game was... Like, I was getting into a new genre. Again, Gears of War is still more amongst the sci-fi. It's futuristic. You have future weapons, you know, alien kind of monster type things. It still is in that vibe. So the fact that this game left such a big impression on me, you know, and it was my first Legend of Zelda game as well. And it just... And then even, like, back then, like in the late 2000s, like those Ocarina of Time was still all the hype. All the Newgrounds animations were all about Ocarina of Time, and I wanted to see what the hype was. I mean, like again, fantasy wasn't my bag, but it was first party Nintendo. I already grew a level of appreciation for Nintendo, and I just kind of got frustrated of not knowing the references, not knowing like the animations or what's called memes today. They weren't called memes back then, but they were still memes of Ocarina of Time. So I wanted to see what it did, and even with being within the like first modern HD gaming era, Ocarina of Time still had up. The story was memorable, the characters were lovable, and once again, Koji Kondo's genius was just showing through, as it's pretty much one of the best and well-known soundtracks in all of human history. Like, there's not a single human being that I've ever ran into that does not recognize most, if not all, of Ocarina of Time's soundtrack. Once I started taking the game seriously, I was hooked. Like, I was older. I was like, video games are awesome. I can buy them now. I just want to play and see what it is. And like, I was able to fully appreciate it for what it was at the older age I played it at. and then a masterpiece that had me in love for like basically 2 generations, like after it released. Like, because we still had the GameCube era, and then I was in the middle of the Xbox 360, Wii U, PlayStation 3 era, and I had to get an Xbox 360 first because Gears of War just looked too amazing to pass up. It's 2 generations later, and I was still impressed by all of that, like how awesome the characters, the story, the music. I was just like, oh my gosh, why is this old game so good? How am I not playing it sooner? And like I said, I wasn't into Zelda or fantasy at the time. This was my first one that introduced me to both, which were probably another big reason why I was so impressed by it. I mean, I was super grateful to have given it a try, and I saw the light. I became a Legend of Zelda fan after that. After this moment, I was foolish. One of Nintendo's greatest work of not only a generation, of a franchise, but of all time, was just experienced, and I was just like blown away. Like, I couldn't stop playing that game. I literally like sat for like 8 hours after my shift in the military one day and played that game, and like again, just mostly exploring, looking around, messing around with stuff, collecting heart pieces, finding spiders, the golden Skelettas. It was great. I mean, the story was so good that I had no sense of that it was an older game. To me, it was just like, it feels like it belonged, like it aged so well. Besides graphically, like just the point of the story just was there. Like, I mean, of course, nostalgia hit here and there because, again, I did play it as a kid a lot. So, like, I didn't own it, but I just loved messing around in it, like going fishing. Like, there's so much freedom, being able to ride a horse, like across an open field. And then, of course, after I played that, because back then I was kind of mostly into Mario and Pokemon and like some third-party titles, and that was it. But I now was like, first-party Nintendo is where it's at, dude. Like, I need to see more from what they make. Like, and that, of course, I knew what first-party publisher meant after that game. I guess that's another big impactful reason as to why I learned so much just playing that game that, like, it was honestly, it should be higher than number 6 on the list, but I already wrote the script. I already talked about and like thought about this. And then just, yeah, it's here. It's number 6. And though I always loved and had a love for Nintendo and Nintendo consoles, I felt like this was the actual game that sealed the deal for my Nintendo fandom, like for first party. I never got really into gaming merch, and so after this game, like, I wanted Ocarina of Time memorabilia, figures, shirts, bags, like stuff like that. Like, at the time, Hot Topic didn't really sell a lot of video game and anime stuff. It was still pretty emo and goth focused, but seeing things at like electronic stores like FYE or like Fi, I know Walmart section, they had their $7.96 shirts. Well, at the time they were $5 of like video game stuff. That was basically where you got these kind of things, and I was hooked. That's when I started becoming a hardcore Nintendo fan. Now, I own, like I said, an Xbox 360 and still loved it, still enjoyed it, but the Wii, I was just like, at the time the Wiis were so poppin', I was like, I gotta get a Wii. I gotta get a Wii. I have to get it. I need it. And of course, they were still super expensive at the time. I already had a DS Lite because, I had a lot of Game Boy Advance games. Like, I had all the Mario games. Of course, I had Super Mario 64. Metroid Prime Hunters was one of the first games to come out for the DS, and I had that game, which I obviously loved. And we'll go into that stuff later. And this game held up so well for me. In Ocarina of Time, I just couldn't believe it went like 8 years without wanting to own it. Like, how? I was a fool. And then, it released later on. And then, for the 3DS, that was a great experience as well. I mean, that just got a facelift. I wish they would have like updated the music like they did in Star Fox 64. Kept the tracks, the same. Even keeping the noise back. I would have liked to hear a little bit more orchestrated versions of that game. So I was kind of sad that they never gave it the Star Fox 64 upgrade with like new voices. You could have kept the old voices, but new music orchestrated. That would have been beautiful for that game. But it was still a great experience. Of course, being able to get the Master Quest for the first time, because remember, I bought the Nintendo 64 version of Ocarina of Time, not the GameCube version. And then, like I said, that was the one that got me into Nintendo. That's just what sealed the deal on Nintendo fanboyism. Like I said, the Xbox, I had an Xbox and a GameCube because the Xbox had some good Star Wars exclusives, just a little something. But even for GameCube, I had like, Super Mario Sunshine. I was able to play that game. It had some good Star Wars exclusives as well, so that was one of the reasons why I got GameCube. But yeah, man, like honestly, like that's again, I can just freaking rant and rant and rant and rant about Ocarina of Time, and just it be its own video. But again, this was supposed to be a top 5 video, so let's go ahead and work on the top 5 stuff right now. Starting with number 5. Of course, let's keep things going in terms of 90s, because that was still like the late 90s was a huge time of impact in terms of me as a gamer, as like that was where a lot of my youth happened. And even this, I mean, of course I've already went over a bunch of Nintendo 64 things, but even PS1 was just an awesome platform. My mom got me this for Christmas after I had a Nintendo 64 for many years, so at least I was able to do Nintendo stuff first. But after like just like the classics I mentioned, I had like a lot of wrestling games, and in terms of that, I was really into wrestling back then. I mean, I mostly rented games like like Rampage and everything, but yeah, once I got a PS1, like this was like interesting. Like besides Sega, this was the first time I've ever owned a console that was different. I mean, oh gosh, I know this always like confuses people, so I definitely wanted to stress that I was indeed a PS1 fan. I didn't get into the JRPGs at the time, but I did play like Resident Evil 1 and 3 and whatnot. Those were fun games. I really liked those games a lot. And then I think PS1 was kind of like the proof that games decided that they were going to grow up with me, and that they're also aiming towards adults with games like that. Resident Evil, M-rated game. I think this is the PlayStation 1 introduced me to many M-rated games. Like it kind of like made me think that, all right, well, video games are not just for they're not just for kids anymore. They're not just a toy. They're actually exploring horror genres, action genres, stuff like that. And like the first like M-rated game I've actually like sat down and got to play from start to finish was Metal Gear Solid. I mean, it was awesome, like on all its glory. Like Metal Gear Solid was like my first ever M-rated game, which was why like I was so drawn to it. I mean, I remember getting this one on a demo disc back in the early years of the PS1, and the Japanese version, it just had like a small snippet of it, and it was in Japanese, and I enjoyed it a lot. It was like my first like action military game, and then with the stealth and everything, we're like, oh, this is cool, this is interesting. And then when the game finally came out in English, I wanted to try it. I was like, oh, hey, I remember seeing it in stores, like, oh, Metal Gear Solid, I finally see it. Luckily, my step-cousin at the time had it, and he had both discs. Unlike my homies, they're usually always missing a disc when I try to borrow it. And then, but yeah, he let me borrow it for a few weeks. I think it was almost a month, as he already played it to death. And, since we went by their house often, I knew I'd be able to return it, take it and return it. And, they know I'd go by and sell them often, so... And of course, I high-key wanted to keep it, though, because that game was amazing. I mean, like I said, the reason it was so packed full, to me, was like that Konami, when the minute that Konami jingle happened, I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. Like, it caught me. Like, obviously, the Konami and, like, the Kojima cults started from this game. Like, every little thing about this game, like, captivated and caught us. Like, yeah, the Kojima cults, this was the reason for it. I mean, he's directed several games, and, as head developer and head leader and whatnot, but this was the one that kind of, like, blew up. Like, if you knew video games, you knew who Kojima was after this moment. I knew this game was, like, not the same as Nintendo games. Like, it was just different. Like, the voice acting, the opening cutscene, like, the serious tone of it, it got me excited, but not, like, in a Sonic or Mario way, but like, oh wow, what is this? This is like a movie. Like the voice acting was good, everything like that. I mean, this game was like so awesome and left such a mark that they later ported it to the GameCube, but I never got to play that one. I've only ever played the PlayStation 1 version. The opening cutscene was, of course, the naval sub deploying a lone Black Ops operative, and Colonel Campbell was, giving Solid Snake his mission briefing. Like the opening was fully voice acted and it had more like a movie like vibe, you know, with a soundtrack. It was more serious than any other game I've ever played before or that I've ever experienced. Like honestly, I didn't believe it was a video game at first. I was like, wait, this is something else, right? Like that's crazy. Like I wasn't sure. And like the main menu had an impactful track. Like it was just like top 10 like video menu screen intros and like menu songs. Like this was one like of the top 5 for sure. I was like, you know, it made me not want to play the game just yet. It wanted me to enjoy the tune. And then, like I said, like the menu just had so much. Like it had the mission briefing before, you know, it kind of like filled you in on previous games. It had like a lot of options for that. So it caught you up to like all the, you know, the previous Metal Gear franchise, the games that were on the NES, what happened to Solid Snake before, who Big Boss was, so on and so forth. So yeah, like, it like carried over to the next generation pretty well. Naturally, when I did start playing it, I realized it's not a run and gun game like other military games I've kind of played at the time, you know, or action games like GoldenEye or Turok, like from the Nintendo 64. I rented those a lot, didn't own or beat those, but you know, I feel like I had to be smart, I had to be sneaky, and I had to be like a little bit more thoughtful in terms of how I got around. You know, as a kid, this was kind of annoying at first, as it was different than any other game I've ever played. Ever, especially in terms of like a military shooter style game. But I quickly got used to the idea once I realized how the mechanics work, and it was fun leaving footprints in the snow and knocking on the wall and distracting the guards. Later, once I was able to get a gun, you know, the game became more fun. Obviously I got to kill things and hide, and you know, if I wanted the game to continue, I had to continue like being stealthy and like do that stuff. So yeah, I had to you know, get my kills in, run away, you know, get some kills in, run away, mess with the guards a little bit, run away. And this game was the first fully like, I guess, story, like cinematic, like fully voiced, like, you know, from the codex to the cutscenes to the gameplay. Like this is like the first time like I've felt fully invested and interested in a video game story, which is another reason why it was so impactful to me. Like, so I wanted to do things right. I didn't want to go like I didn't want to miss anything. I wanted to get all the collectibles. Well, there wasn't really collectibles. There was like items that were hidden if you went off the beaten path. I wanted to find those extra grenades, those extra bullets. Like I didn't know video games could even have this level of like narrative and story. Like the mood was created. Like, you know, before it was like, oh, capture the princess. Here's some text about what's going on. And like, yeah, sure, it kind of had a story, but at the end of the day, it was just like gameplay and fun. But it was so in depth, like so well thought out, you know. It was a story that, you know, you can tell they put a lot of work and effort, and the gameplay for it just moved the story so nicely and smoothly that it just, honestly, it was, for lack of a better term, perfect. It's still one of my all-time favorite games today. And you know, even when I was getting footage for this video, like after I left and I was like, okay, that's enough footage, I kept playing the game. I was just so trapped in it, and it's just like I can never, like I have to force myself to stop playing this game after I haven't played it in so long. And like I said, it was pretty much the sole reason the Hideo Kojima cults started, and I cannot say that this game did not reserve that reputation. Like, it just, reception with it was so well. It was such a well-made game. Like, honestly, like Hideo Kojima like went down in history in the gaming community and pop culture community because of this game. I mean, the story had its twists. The bosses felt important and not just like gun fodder, or like, you know, like they felt like they had a role. Like they felt like they meant something. They had reason. They were just some of the most unique characters I've ever encountered in all of gaming. You know, Sniper Wolf, Revolver Ocelot. You know, these are like enemies that we know and like hear of for like all of like eternity in pop culture. You see them still being cosplayed at cons today. I mean, Psycho Mantis still being one of the best yet most annoying bosses that, you know, you've ever had to beat. And the way to beat him was hidden on the cover, if I remember correctly, like, you know, having to switch out ports. You had to look for those clues on the game case. Like, it broke the fourth wall too with his, you know, so you like to play Castlevania, or you haven't saved often, you're somewhat reckless. Like, it broke that fourth wall, and I was just like, oh wow, this is cool, this is crazy. Like, the fact that they knew about this or can read my, you know, memory card data was just itself amazing. I mean, of course, let's go into some flaws. The graphics were typical PS1, but the music and the mood, the game provided were amazing for its time. And even still today, like when I was getting this footage, like, gosh, this game still holds up. It's so good. Like I said, like replaying it again on the PlayStation 1 Vita, like I guess you could say, is a lot nicer. Obviously smaller screen. I mean, that's kind of like my preferred method of playing that game is on the PlayStation Vita, because I have it on that system as well besides my PS3. But like other than graphics, this game is still freaking amazing today. This game was my first larger than life final boss experience. Like, you know, fighting, you know, the Mecha Rex was just like, it was, that boss fight was literally probably one of my like top boss fights of all time. It's the ones that I remember the most. It's multiple phases. You know, it's just like the ending of course was so epic, because even though you thought you won, you still got to fight, and like, you know, it was so good. It was epic. There's just so much that this game did right. It's hard for me to find what it did wrong. Like, and I've tried. I like to pick games apart, but I mean, it just, I don't know. As time went on, you kind of like see flaws in games more. But for this one, I just kept seeing what they did right more than what I did the last time they played it. And also, again, the ending also had two different options, two different endings. You know, both felt great, both felt impactful, both felt canon. Like, honestly, when I got one ending and not the other, like, sure, I liked, you know, one ending over the other. I won't spoil it. I mean, honestly, if I can talk about it, you know, screw it, spoiler alert. But yeah, when Meryl survived, I was just like, okay, this is a great ending. But when she died, I felt like that was a good one too. It was impactful. Like, there was a different story. You found out that was actually Colonel Campbell's daughter, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, dude, this is so awesome. Like, I was so glad I got both endings. And of course, getting the quote unquote bad ending, or the ending she doesn't survive, you get a really cool, like, for like kind of going through that pain, you kind of got a really cool like invisibility cloak for New Game Plus, and it was just amazing. And like, that was just like the first time I ever felt like a real sense of loss in a video game, was when I got the bad ending for that. That was the first time where I really felt like emotionally torn by a video game. I think I was like 11 or 12 when I played this. Like, I was still pretty young. I just was just like, oh my god, like, wow, this fucking sucks. Like, I was just like, honestly, like almost in tears. Obviously, I was just like, tough it out. But it was just the first time I think a game got me that emotional in the history of like my first time ever playing video games. But the fact that the game was so good made me just, it's really stuck with me over these years. And of course, Metal Gear had some little Easter eggs here and there if you played with the codex, you know, all that stuff. Certain equipment equipped, like new conversations. Even the long conversations over the codex were never boring, and you know, they're still used today for memes and announcements. I mean, I'm sure you've seen all the Metal Gear Solid like codex memes. They're still going on today. They've never stopped. Like I said, I've played this game multiple times, like when I actually had it, and of course throughout the time of being alive. It's like, even with like amongst the later gens, I still enjoy it. But you know, it just, honestly, it kind of like sealed the deal on like, dude, single player is the way to go. Like, single player stories, experiences like this, or just what like kind of like made me like, wow, yeah, like this is something that's going to grow with me. This is something that's only going to get better, and this is something that, you know, I want to see what happens in the future. I mean, like I said, this is just one of those games I can go on and on and on. I mean, it appears that even today, most all the Game of the Year winners are single player adventures most of the time. So that just kind of like brings me back to the point that single player is the best. I love it. I will always endure it. This game kind of set that standard that, you know what, single player is where it's at. This is something I've always wanted for my video games ever since then. Is just a good story, a good plot, good everything like Metal Gear Solid brought. I make it a point to replay this game like once every few years to see if it still holds up in terms of like personal gamer experience. And of course, besides graphically, it still remains one of the best games I've ever played. And I may have to stream Twin Snakes, the GameCube version point, at some point if I could find it for a reasonable price, because I'm starting to get the itch to play this game after getting my hands on it, and like, you know, getting that footage for you guys to make this video. But oh man, like I said, it's just one of those games I can go on and rant on about. I mean, but yeah, since I've never experienced the the most modern version of this masterpiece, the GameCube version, I definitely want to at least give it a try once. I mean, like I said, I got a GameCube now. I can go ahead and get this game if I can ever find it for a reasonable price and stream it. I mean, worst case scenario, it'll just sting so bad not to be able to experience again that I'll just end up playing it on the what's it called? Oh, I know what I'm talking about here. Oh, the PlayStation 1. Like I said, I'm able to stream this on my PlayStation 3, and I have the PlayStation 3 Classics. But again, impactful game because it was just so awesome in terms of story. It was awesome in terms of gameplay. It was awesome in terms of like me experiencing like them breaking the fourth wall for the first time. Great bosses, great voice acting, fantastic music. And it just honestly one of my all-time best top favorite games that I've ever played. And it wasn't even a Nintendo game. This is also one of the games that kind of made me think, you know what, I need to look outside and explore outside Nintendo. And that's when I started like playing Resident Evil, started like kind of looking at Xbox, PlayStation, like everyone else. Like honestly, like I said, I have a beastly gaming PC today. If it wasn't for this game, I think I would have just been a pure Nintendo fanboy. Like, I'm here to stay with Nintendo, but thanks to Metal Gear Solid, I was definitely more open to trying new games, new experiences, and it basically made me an overall general gamer. Like, it made me one of those gamers that if your game looks good and it like feels good to me, I will love it and play it and just hype it up for days and weeks and years. But anyway, guys, like I said, this was just number 5, so I still got other games to talk about, but let's go ahead and go on to number 4. In the peak of the hype of the new Star Wars trilogy prequels that kind of happened in the early 2000s, there were like so many Star Wars video games that released around this time. Like, you know, we had the Battlefront series that was kind of born in this era as well. Honestly, Battlefront, the original 2 anyway, are still 2 of the best ever Star Wars video games to ever exist. Of course, we had the Jedi Knight series, you know, Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy. That one was also part of that series. The GameCube had, you know, Rogue Squadron 2, which was the sequel to the Nintendo 64 version, and of course Rogue Squadron 3, which came out later on. And of course, the Xbox had the exclusive Knights of the Old Republic video games, you know, 1 and 2. And personally, Knights of the Old Republic, the first one, was, to me, the best Star Wars game to ever exist, and one of the most impactful RPG games I've ever experienced. And that's what kind of got me more into the like, I guess you could say, turn-based genre. I mean, besides Pokemon, this was like kind of the only other game that I played within that series that took a lot of time. That was a slower paced combat game. You know, when I was a kid, I was all about that fast action, live action gameplay. I didn't really have too much interest in turn-based, Pokemon being the exception, just because it was Pokemon. I mean, of course, Knights of the Old Republic won several Game of the Year awards, and I remember hearing many people talking about it, that I had to see what the hype was. I was, you know, able to get an Xbox one year for Christmas. But, you know, I already had a GameCube, so I was definitely looking at, you know, getting other consoles. And the Xbox was basically just a Star Wars machine as far as I was concerned, because honestly, like, you know, like I mentioned a few games earlier, Knights of the Old Republic, you know, Battlefront, of course, the Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy series. Those ended up being like the only games I got for it. No Halo, no nothing. It got good Star Wars exclusives. I wanted those. I mean, the game starts you off as a mere soldier, scout, or scoundrel. You can kind of pick between which class you wanted to do, and then I think whatever you picked gave you more perks. And then you were under attack by, you know, Darth Malak, who is the apprentice of Darth Revan, who is kind of like the main, and he was supposed to be like the main antagonist of the story. He was the thing, like, oh my gosh, you know, Darth Revan was super scary, now we gotta worry about Darth Malak, his apprentice. But hey, you know, spoiler alert, I mean, if you haven't played this game by now, you need to play it, but I'm about to give you spoilers, so be careful. You might want to skip to number 2 if you don't want to hear this. But yeah, Darth Revan ends up being the character that you play, basically the character you create under Jedi memory modification. So you ended up being Darth Revan this whole time. And this was later on revealed to you by Darth Malak himself, which was a huge plot twist for me. I personally, like, it was the biggest plot twist I think I've ever experienced in gaming, to be honest. It was like the first time I was just like, what, oh my god, mind blown, how, who, what, where. I mean, it was so impactful, and I was very glad I was able to experience this, because sadly that that big old reveal twist that made The Empire Strikes Back so great, and why it made, you know, so many people love that one more than any other Star Wars, was spoiled for me as a kid. I mean, I was never able to experience this personally. I mean, I felt like The Empire Strikes Back was my least favorite of the OG trilogies too, because you didn't have a cool space battle. Sure, you had a somewhat cool lightsaber battle, but you know, I felt like all the heroes in that movie lost. And like when I went to go see like the original Star Wars in theaters, everybody told me the big secret in the big reveal, like, oh hey, like you went to go see Star Wars, did you know Darth Vader's Luke's father? And I'm like, what? No? Oh, okay, cool. So I never got to experience that like the rest of the world. They thought it was the best because they got it, but I never, but since when I saw it, I knew it was coming. It obviously had no impact for me, but no big reveal for me. It was spoiled. But KOTOR, or Knights of the Old Republic, gave me, I'll call it KOTOR, but it gave me what was taken away from me at a younger age. I was, you know, grateful to be able to experience such a huge Star Wars plot twist like that I never got to experience as a kid. So I was very grateful and thankful, and that was one of the biggest impacts that had on me as a gamer. I mean, and it just made the series timeless, not only for fans, because that is still considered one of the best Star Wars games even amongst the fans, but you know, for me personally. And besides that, up until now, I've only experienced like movie related lore and battles, and like whether it would have been books or like, I guess, yeah, books, video games, like, you know, Shadows of the Empire for the Nintendo 64. I rented that a lot, played that a lot. But yeah, that was like still, though it was kind of like the extended universe, it was still part of, you know, the actual movie lore. And this was like the first Star Wars game that gave me something beyond the movies, like in terms of lore, like Jedi and Sith lore, and, you know, Jedi holocrons, stuff like that, and worlds that were like not mentioned or seen or talked about in the old movies, or talked about like Dantooine, but never seen until now. This, like, Dantooine was actually a real tangible place after this game. And of course Tatooine shows up. I mean, I think every trilogy visits Tatooine or something like it at some point. But, you know, it, like I said, shows up in everything. I just felt like it kind of needed to be there at that point. I mean, the rest were like entirely new locations. Never heard or seen of Korriban, the Sith world. You know, Manan was cool. Seeing that as well was nice. And of course, we got new races, like, you know, the Mandalorians. Got to learn about, you know, a little bit more about those. That, you know, the Iridorians. You got like, I mean, there was other new races like the Manan creatures and whatnot, and then you got more info on like old existing races that, you know, I didn't have a lot of time to look into. I mean, the internet wasn't big back then. I mean, this was still a pretty big deal for me, being pretty recent in the fandom. Remember, I just got exposed to the Star Wars franchise in the late 90s when they re-released the original trilogy in the theaters. I mean, even Episode 1 was a 1999 theater release, and this game came out in 2003. So, I mean, this was still all pretty early in the franchise. You know, I was able to choose between light and dark. And then, you know, I was very serious. This was the first time, this was another impactful reason I was so serious about this game. I just did not want any dark side points my first playthrough. Even if I accidentally got it, I would go back to another save point for choosing the wrong one, because I was like, okay, this sounds right. But it ended up giving me dark side points or something like that. I was like, oh gosh, no. Like, I just wanted to do it right. And the game was very long, and it was even longer because I wanted to explore every planet, check every place that I could for items, robes, monies, crystals, etc. You know, if there's a side quest, I wanted to do it. If it could make me stronger Jedi with more experience, I wanted to do it. And then if I could kill it, not get dark side points, I wanted to kill it, and while maintaining the good side. And obviously the characters were memorable. I remember Bastila, I remember Jolie Bindo, you know, I remember Cass Onassi. Like, I'm not even looking these guys up, and I can just remember them off the top of my head. And of course, the San Francisco Orchestra did a great, fantastic job with the soundtrack that almost rivaled even John Williams' pieces himself. I mean, some of the worlds weren't as open as I would like. I mean, going off the topic of music and back into the game, but the soundtrack was amazing. But yeah, the worlds weren't as open as I would have liked, but they were still amazing experiences. I mean, Tatooine kind of had an open desert, but I just kind of wanted more of that for like the rest of the levels. I feel like Korriban kind of was like could have been bigger, but small complaint. I mean, technology at the time wasn't up there just yet, but it was still great. The combat system was structured in a way that many future series ended up doing, where it wasn't necessarily turn-based. They were just kind of fighting automatically, and you picked commands. I feel like Xenoblade did that later on. Final Fantasy did that as well. I don't know if this was the first game that did that, but it definitely feels like it was, and it definitely was the first time I've ever experienced it. But games like that with that sort of gameplay definitely made me want to check out others that played similarly to it. So it was definitely a good introduction for me as well. And then it was just one of those defining games. And of course, choosing the dark side and ending that kind of made me realize that this was freaking easy mode. Like, I'm killing everybody. I don't have to do any fetch quests. I'm getting all this money for killing all these people. And I ended up thinking that was so easy later on. And then I don't know. Dark side was easy mode, but of course I had to play it through once as well. Just once I knew who it was, and it was a lot more satisfying to kind of play the dark side. And there was a lot of cool space battle cutscenes, and I feel like that was a big part of the game. I wish I had more than just the man turret battle. I would have liked to have seen some kind of more like space battle focus kind of thing. But I mean, overall it was great game, great experience. Again, it was so impactful just due to the big reveal, the gameplay, the music, and of course like the first like RPG genre that wasn't Pokemon turn based. And all right, let's just go ahead and get on to number 3. Like most of the world, I did not get a Sega Saturn or a Dreamcast. Those are like kind of like the last two big, like, I guess you could say Sega consoles that sadly failed. I mean, that's another debate and another movie topic altogether. So the vast majority of my younger gaming comrades in arms' first 3D Sonic game experience ever was Sonic Adventure Battle 2. Now, I don't know why this game came out on the GameCube first, and the one before it, which was ported in 2003. I think the first one was ported over. Sonic Adventure Battle 2 was ported to the GameCube in 2001. So we didn't see the first Sonic Adventure port until like 2 years afterwards. But I was very glad it happened that way later on, because when the 90s already had such a golden standard for Sonic games. You had the original Sonic the Hedgehog trilogy. I mean, this was the first one that I felt, and probably like the only one, honestly, in my opinion, that got 3D Sonic right. The fact that you're able to play, both light and dark sides was new to me. Again, I played this game before, Knights of the Old Republic, so this is kind of like my first ever real, like, I guess you could say, like, experience. Like, it didn't really affect the story that much, it wasn't a choice, I guess you could say, so that's why Knights of the Old Republic still kind of has the top spot for that. But this one actually had, oh hey, you can play as Dr. Eggman. That was like a big deal to me. One had the option to play the characters that I know, like Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, just the normal heroes. And then of course Dr. Eggman was a playable character, Shadow the Hedgehog, let's see, who else was there? Rouge the Bat. And of course I couldn't believe this is the first time I was able to play the villain side of any story, personally. I mean, so this was kind of like one of the reasons why it was so impactful to me. And this was pretty much my main motivation, for going to be able to play both sides of the story, was because at first I was like, heroes, that's all I care about, that's all I want to know. And I was like, well, Dr. Eggman's playable. I've never, like, besides like Mario Kart or but in a story in an actual video game that wasn't a spin-off, like for fun and parties. This is the first time I was able to play a villain as a character, as a playable character, so that's what stood out to me. I wasn't really interested in Shadow the Hedgehog all that much. I was already pretty hooked on the cool blue blur that is Sonic the Hedgehog, LOL. But nah, the gameplay was good and smooth, and it felt good. A few bugs here and there, but it was kind of like rare. Gathering footage for this video kind of made me realize just how jank the camera was, but at the time, it was fine for its standard. It was smooth. I mean, I remember at the time thinking, oh, this is pretty cool. But I feel like most of the problem were like in the Sonic and Shadow levels. Knuckles and Rouge were like full 3D cameras, like, you're able to like go around you with the C-stick, so I didn't really experience that issue in that. It was just kind of like the Sonic the Hedgehog levels in Shadow, because it was supposed to be like a straight pass. You were only supposed to go kind of like in one general direction, so the camera wasn't exactly pristine for those levels. But once I got used to the levels, I was able to blaze through it, and then camera control wasn't a problem. I mean, this game was crazy fun in terms of like the Sonic and Shadow levels. As you progress to the game, you got like equipable items like, the light dash, the bounce. Knuckles had the gloves where he was able to bury underground. It gave you access to new areas, like in the story and in the game. And you were even able to go back into the older levels and make use of those items that you found as well. Like, you're able to access areas that you weren't able to access before. And, it made it easier to find, secrets. And, of course, you were able to find other items if you went back and explored. So that was really cool and really awesome, as this made the replayability very good. And of course, I also appreciated on how the Chaos Emeralds were no longer special stages, but just part of the story. I mean, the special stage novelty by then kind of already wore off, since we were focused more on... I was focused more on like story-focused games, and just kind of like appreciated those a heck of a lot more. And like the special stage, I just felt like, it's kind of old. They're kind of hard towards the end for no reason. So, I mean, later on we did see special stages return. I think Sonic Heroes had they had a few here and there. But in this case, it was nice to see them as more of a plot device than an actual something that you had to obtain. Like, just because this game also still remains, in my top spots for personal and unforgettable video game soundtracks. I mean, honestly, in my personal opinion, and in most in the communities, this is totally the best Sonic original soundtrack by far. Best OST. I have yet to hear a modern Sonic game kind of compete with it. How even Smash Bros. Brawl knew to reveal Sonic with "To the Live and Learn," which was the main theme for this for this game. Being able to play multiple characters didn't feel forced, and all parts felt very rewarding. Like, they all felt like they had important parts of the story. The Tails level to save Sonic, that was part, and once Sonic was out, everything like that. When the island blew up, everything had a purpose. Knuckles' levels for the Master Emerald, towards the end and towards like the unlocked ending, you were able to, it was kind of all worth it. Like, everything felt like it was for a greater purpose, and I definitely liked that. And I enjoyed playing all the characters levels. I felt, the robot levels, like the mecha levels with Tails and Dr. Eggman felt good. The Sonic levels felt great. The Knuckles levels, it was kind of like my first taste of 3D sandbox Sonic, which I still think they were some of the best and fun levels I think the franchise has ever had. And it was, of course, like I said, a lot of replayability. I wanted to improve like so much. Like, I wanted those S ratings. And, that rating system was definitely cool. Like, there was a secret if you got all A ratings from the levels, and it was just pretty awesome. So it was. Oh, and yeah, let's not forget the Chow Garden. I was so hooked. God dang, I was hooked on addicting to raising those cute little things, and would sometimes just go into the garden just to hear, the garden theme, or even just when you were in the lobby, just hearing that theme song was pretty cool. And it was just so relaxing, and one of my anxiety calming tools in my teen years, honestly, like, kind of having those virtual pets to take care of, replaying the game multiple times just to get those animals or those chaos shards to kind of raise them up. And wow, man, I'm just going back and getting this game footage now, it like triggered such emotional nostalgia for me that I had to avoid playing it in fear of burnout. Like I was just like, no. Like, that was just the fear I've always had, like, for that game. Like, I don't want to play it too much because I just don't want to burn it out. Like, but I also wanted to raise my Chow. But then back then, I knew no matter how much I played it, I never got burnt out of it. The story was good, the music was good, like, getting better at the levels and getting the higher ranks were good. But I just had that irrational fear, I guess. And the multiplayer was actually pretty fun as well, hence the quote-unquote battle title. It had some exclusive levels, so I found a reason to play it with someone, with grinding. That was one of the, like, selling points of the game as a kid, and a lot of kids had the shoes that were allowed you to grind on rails and stuff. And then, seeing that in the game just kind of felt like, oh, wow, this is cool. And, multiplayer had nothing but, like, whole grinding stages where it's like you're just on a rail and you're racing to the finish. And I would even get my younger sister to play as often, as it was the only way I was able to play them. But yeah, it was just pretty cool. Naturally, all the Sonic levels and Shadow levels had the best soundtrack for me personally, but Knuckles levels were also way too memorable. And you had they're still used in memes today. I mean, try going the entire month of October without hearing the Pumpkin Hill level for Knuckles. Spoiler alert, you can't. The biggest treat of them all was, what really stuck to me was that it was the first time in my life as a gamer I say two enemies I've known since age 4 and 5 put aside their BS and work together to save the world. I mean, beating both sides of the story had the final story route, and it had both sides of the characters to stop the final boss. And of course, Phase 1 and Phase 2 of said final boss was one of the most intense and mood amplifying songs that I've ever experienced. The Bio Lizard theme, and of course, the Super Sonic, Super Shadow moments. It still remains one of my all-time favorite boss fights to ever exist. And I know I already mentioned that for other games on this list, but the Bio Lizard was just it stuck to me, man. And seeing Dr. Eggman and Sonic and Shadow and Tails and Rouge and Knuckles kind of all get together to kind of come together for this final boss phase, because once you beat both sides of the story, you unlock to the secret ending. And just to see that for the first time ever in gaming was just oh man, enemies can work together. I mean, like I said, I can go and later on create a list of all-time favorite endings or boss fights, final boss fights as well, but that'll be another video in itself, and a lot of these games will kind of be popped up in there again. I mean, the game had a bittersweet ending that made me way too emotional for a Sonic game. I mean, I don't know, after so many years of being with most of these characters and see the old blur sad, kind of got me in my feels, especially since, Shadow's story was pretty sad, and seeing how it kind of ended for him, I was just dang. And naturally, it was determined that Shadow is, here to stay, so they're oh, surprise, he came back. So that was a relief. But, not knowing what was going on beforehand, was super impactful. Wow, this was the first time I've ever experienced a real sense of loss in any video game, a real sad, bittersweet story. I don't know, I guess when Metal Gear Solid, sure, the ending was sad, but I didn't really feel as emotionally attached to Meryl as I did Sonic and those characters. So to kind of see them in an emotional state after so many years made me feel more connected to them as a character and as a human being. And just in general, emotions, that this is the first time I've ever seen something sad about characters I've cared about for so long. And of course, I gotta freaking hit this topic on. The only bad thing I have to say about this game is this game was the start of the cringe Sonic OC fan art era. And basically, not too long after this game came out is when it peaked. Oh god, it was so cringy, it was so bad. Even I was just I like Sonic. I mean, luckily the other games being so terrible was one of the reasons that that cringe OC Sonic fan art era kind of died down. But yeah, this is the one that made it freaking rampant. And of course, you got the Sonic Paradox series that happened, the Newgrounds animation, and then all that good stuff. But I mean, of course, throughout the years, a lot of us were still taking care of their child. I think I took care of mine almost all through high school. And it never fully went away, though. We still have that cringe Sonic OC group that's exclusive now, but it'll never die. Sadly, it's not as big as it once was, but I'm just kind of glad it's over with. And but I don't know. We'll just see if they can finally get the franchise done right, because I just feel like they've messed it up so long for just years. We kind of were all holding on to hope because of this game. They just couldn't do it. I mean, sadly, they never got this right again. And the only times they did, which was Sonic Generations and Sonic Mania, was because they were callbacks to when Sonic was good. And I didn't think the franchise will ever be as great and have a lasting impact on us as this did. This was the game that defined the franchise for the modern era. I mean, but like I said, yeah, Generations is good. Sonic Mania, they were great, but they didn't have that freaking pizzazz. They just took bits and parts of what made Sonic great, mostly from the Sega Genesis and from Sonic Adventure Battle 2, mushed it all into one game and was there you go, here's Generations and Mania. And that was the only reason why they did so great. But they're not memeable like Sonic Adventure Battle 2 is. They don't have that impact. They're not there and they don't just resonate with like not only the fans but like just the gaming community in general as much as Sonic Adventure Battle 2 did. Like, even if you don't like Sonic now, so many people I know who are just like, dude, they know Sonic Adventure Battle 2. They played the crap out of that game. They raised those chow. And, you know, like I said, besides it giving birth to the Sonic OC Hell era, it was, you know, it was still worth experiencing when it was first relevant. You know, even my sister can vouch about how much I played this game and how much she enjoyed this game as well. It was just one of those that just was unforgettable. Like, I mean, like I said, Sonic will probably never be the same since, but I was glad to experience this game when I did, because this was just one of those ones that like people would get or borrow GameCubes from their friends to play. Like, everybody wanted to play this game, I remember. And like I said, it was impactful just to see, you know, like, this is like my first time experiencing real emotional video game loss for characters, and this was like the first time I saw like well-known years and years of, you know, villain and hero like going at each other's neck, just kind of like said, you know what, let's cut the BS, let's just work together and do this and end it all. And that felt really cool to see. But yeah, anyway guys, I've talked about this game enough. Let's go ahead and go on to the great big number 2. In the late 90s, there was one thing that definitely took us kids by storm. I mean, that was just, oof, man, I remember it, you remember it. The mania that was the all-time biggest mania I think I've ever got involved in. It was the first time Pokemon arrived to the States and on the scene. And it was the biggest franchise ever in terms of, like, you know, 90s popularity. Like, I think even to this day, it's still the highest grossing, like, selling franchise of, like, entertainment franchise of all time, like, including movies, merchandise, video games, TV shows, stuff like that. But yeah, no, Pokemon has been around for ages and ages, and it was a thing when I was a kid, and that's the first time we've ever saw it. You couldn't just not like Pokemon, like everyone did. Whether it was the show, the cards, the game, you had to like one of the things from Pokemon. And not that any of us said it, but it was just kind of like one of those things that we knew. Like, if you didn't like something from Pokemon, it was just kind of like those unwritten rules. Like, the anime was great, and like that's how I kind of got exposed to the franchise, to be honest with you. It was a show. Being 11 years old and seeing like a 10-year-old kid, you know, go on an adventure was like super awesome. I mean, of course, to me and to most of the neighborhood kids, like, what? This kid was able to catch monsters and battle them? That's so cool. It's like us, but with coolness. And a fellow kid was out there doing big things in the world, so we all kind of related to that. And then it didn't take long for me to see the TV ads and realize that this started from Nintendo. Like, I remember seeing Nintendo being kind of like on the front page, like, oh yeah, the games, get the games, and you know, they're from us. Like, and then only issue is that I needed a Game Boy to be able to experience the original game for the first time, to see how like the heart really actually started. Naturally, as a kid, you know, you only got things around, you know, Christmas and your birthday time. So I was able to get Pokemon Yellow in, I think, 2000, like early 2000, just because, you know, they couldn't find one around Christmas. Because it came out, like, I want to say, like, yeah, like fall of 99, a few months after it came out. And I stated all I wanted was a Game Boy Color and Pokemon Yellow. Because, yeah, I mean, that was the Pikachu edition. But they were still hard to find even back then, until my mom, she worked at a pawn shop at the time, and they actually got, you know, Game Boy Color as well as Pokemon. So, and then Pokemon Yellow was closer to the original show than Red and Blue was. So I was like super excited, and that was the version I want. You know, so I was excited to get that version, because at the time I was like, I'll settle for anything, Mom, but I just want Pokemon Yellow if that's at all possible. But it being the newest one, I knew it was kind of hard. And, you know, I wanted Pikachu as my starter, just like in the show. You know, I wanted to be able to fight Jesse and James. That was one of the big selling points. Yellow version also gives you the original 3 starters in the game, just like it did in the show. You know, you got Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle. You know, of course, the story had to progress, but you still got them. So that was just all around preferable. Because remember, the show was how I experienced it first, so that's what I wanted my experience of the game to be, closely related to the show as possible. And what was really crazy is, like, the schools at the time had like a no Pokemon anything policy. I think excluding like shirts and backpacks and lunch bags. But if you brought cards, games, toys, didn't matter what it was. If it was Pokemon related, it would get confiscated. Only you would only get it back at either one at the end of the year, or two, your parents came and picked it up. And then one time I got some cards taken away, but I'm not gonna lie, I high key took them back when we left for lunch one time. I stayed last in line and never turned that corner. But yeah, I went back to the teacher's desk and took them back a few days later. I mean, at the time when they put that policy, her collection just kept growing and growing in her desk. So it was going to be harder to pinpoint that mine was the only ones that were missing. And besides being the only one of the cool kids that had the yellow version, as most kids adopted red and blue pretty early, because 96 to 99, that was a pretty significant difference between the red and blue release and the yellow release. And because it was very tough to tell your parents you wanted a new game that was generally the same with a few extra differences. So I felt so beastly getting it, even though I was late to the party. I got the yellow version, and it obviously made my cool points go up, because I was in 5th and 6th grade when I started playing that game. Obviously, there wasn't much of a difference story-wise, but kids did find it unfair that I always was able to counter their starter, because remember, the yellow version had all 3 starters plus Pikachu, so everybody just thought I was crazy OP in terms of battles, and obviously I didn't want to trade any of my guys away. But it was just, that's all it was, just access to the starters. I wasn't OP, and the game didn't make any of us stronger, but it was just a problem they all had. We were able to counter their starters no matter what. This was my first ever turn-based JRPG, so that was one of the reasons why it made such an impact. And of course, my first Pokemon game, which, again, those two alone will tell you why this game was so freaking impactful to me. And this was the first time I learned about buffs, debuffs, type weaknesses, just the traditional JRPG stuff. I mean, I was 11 years old, and I was able to understand that because the show made it a pretty easy concept. Fire against water, wasn't going to do very well, water against leaf or plant wasn't going to do very well, etc., etc. I had to had to use a lot of strategy, a lot of thinking, a lot of tact, but thanks to already being into the show, I generally knew what to do and which Pokemon to catch based off knowing the gyms. And then I just kind of already had familiarity with everything. The 8-bit soundtrack was obviously super memorable, and most of them did match the show. So I thought that was cool that the show kind of kept the same soundtrack as well. So that was a very pleasant treat. And of course, most of those songs and soundtracks are remixed today and put in other games. How many times was Pokemon first gen remade into a game? It was a lot. And not to mention, Gen 2 also had some tracks from the original game that were remixed and slightly done up to for Gen 2. This game was, like I said, simple yet complex, and it literally started the trend of almost every Pokemon gen getting a 3rd gen game. Yellow was the 3rd gen game that did so well that the next generation they got Crystal version, 3rd generation got Emerald, so there was always that 3rd game. There are several NPCs to talk to. I felt like a lot to explore. And you were often rewarded with items. If you went off the beaten path and clicked A in an empty spot, sometimes it gave you something. And even some developer Easter eggs in the, I forgot what it was, the Rainbow Gym Badge City. I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. It wasn't Cerulean City, but I can't remember. Celadon City? I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, the Elite Four was one of the most memorable and iconic final bouts in history. Not only within gaming, but also, of course, within the Pokemon franchise. Winning them made you really feel like you've earned it. It was a lot harder than it was a lot harder back then than it was today. And I never met somebody that was able to get past the Elite Four in one go. You had to do some grinding there first, because you still had to fight, Gary, or AKA Blue, the final boss, being your neighbor / rival, which was a pretty cool surprise. We all knew it was coming, but to actually kind of see that in game, somebody that's kind of been there from the beginning, be the final boss was really cool. So, not to mention it was funny to take the champ status away from someone who literally just earned it minutes before you did. Catching Mewtwo, like you did in the movie, was also my first post-game experience. Oh, actually, no, you didn't catch Mewtwo in the movie, but to see him and get some of his story, backstory that kind of matched with the movie was pretty cool. But that was my first post-game. Okay, you beat the game, but there's more to do after the game. So that was another reason why it was so impactful for me anyway. And this was because the first time you were able to do more than just the story. After the credits rolled, there was more stuff you can do. and you were able to play the Pokemon League again. I think they were at like a slightly higher level, which was really cool. And then this game kind of coined Gen 2 to also have a bigger like post game. Like after you beat the the Elite Four in Gen 2, you also had to go and get the Kanto region, do their quest. You were able to beat the Elite Four again at a higher level, and then you were able to like fight Red as well. So I think like that kind of started the trend of post game content. I feel like, to me, in my experience, that was, I don't know if this was the first ones to do it, but I definitely think it was, and I think that this is the first time like Gen 1 and Gen 2 were like the first two Pokemon games to ever give you like post-credit content. Gen 2 being obviously a lot more meaty than the first. But I mean, that was just so cool to me to like have. And of course, second gen, kind of was like from my evolution from child to teen. I was like in 7th grade when that game came out. And well, it was a confusing time for me. I think anybody going through puberty would like had some questions. And it was a game I found a lot of solitude in terms of like mental health and mental wellness. It was just something that was kind of growing up with me. Interesting enough, though, like the reason I felt first gen was like best gen is because that's what started the movement, the franchise. Like that's still relevant today. Several years later. It was something no one made fun of because everybody was into it. The first Pokemon movie still remains the highest grossing anime movie of all time in the US. Pokemon 2000 being number 2. And of course, the Dragon Ball Super, the Broly movie was number 3. I mean, and it just reached its peak with Gen 1. And I've never seen the same hype for Pokemon since. Like, Gen 2 was also a big part of that, too. Gen 2 was the first time we got new Pokemon and, a day and night cycle. And they, you still go back to Kanto to get more badges. So, I mean, the fact that, like, you were able to kind of experience that again, that new Pokemon feel, like, that was the first time we ever got Pokemon. So that was still something super awesome to experience. And then, and the fact that you were able to fight the character Red, and, post-game was pretty awesome. So that was epic. But again, we're just kind of getting into an entirely different video topic. So let's go ahead and check out and see what's on that awesome, mighty, mega, super number 1 spot that is the most inspirational game to the Otakunator. As I mentioned before, I was born in the 80s, and this game is single-handedly like the reason that the home console market was even revived after the 1970s crash. Like, there was no consoles for a while until the first NES Nintendo home console came out, and this game made it a success. This is probably the most, like, honestly, the single most played game like in the world. And it's just the most known about game in all of human history, honestly. Like, this game is just nobody that I ever known or met, whether it's, adults, older person, like older adult, like grandparent age, young, they all know the Super Mario Brothers game. And this game has one of the most recognizable songs in the entire world over the span of several generations, the Super Mario Brothers, theme song. And then this game is without a doubt gave birth to not only the mascot of a company, Nintendo, but the mascot of like the entire gaming industry itself. No one that I've ever encountered is unaware of who Super Mario is or who the Super Mario Brothers are. They know who they are as well. And of course, this is where it all started for me as well. I mean, and I know, like, medically speaking, kids are not supposed to be able to remember things from age 3 and 4. However, I do. The farthest back I can remember is stuff from when I was age 3, but not before one particular life event that happened. I remember, I'm pretty sure it was like, asking for my mom to play with me or something, or bugging her about something. And then she had an NES hooked up to the TV, and I think it was my grandma's at the time, and my mom was just using it because, it often came and went. I remember seeing it come and go, but I just never actually, knew much about it or seen it. But she was busy with something, and then she showed me the NES and showed me how it worked. And it was the one that had like Super Mario Brothers, the Duck Hunt, and it was like the discus shooting game on it. I don't know if you guys remember that. But she showed me how Mario worked and passed me the controller. And it was all over for me there, folks. Like that was it. I was never going to be the same again. I was reborn anew. To say that I was hooked would be an understatement. I literally played for hours until it got dark, when it started in the morning. And like, I wasn't good at it by any means, but I understood it. I beat some levels. From then on, I remembered. I just remembered things. I remembered, some life events. That was it. Playing Super Mario Brothers is the first ever memory I ever have in terms of like being alive and existing. That was the first thing that I remembered. And of course later on she showed me Dunk Hunt, which was fun and a lot easier to play, and I found it so amazing that the TV could tell where I aimed, and felt the annoyance of the dog, not being able to shoot him. So I was like really, really young when I got my first gamer rage as well. So that's another reason why. Not only was it my first video game, it was my first Nintendo game, my first Mario game, and of course it was the first time I've ever experienced nerd rage. From then on I loved video games a lot. Sure, I still liked my my Ninja Turtles and my Hot Wheels cars. Still had those action figures, and eventually the Power Rangers, but I learned quickly that if it exists, especially back then, there's probably a video game for it. So there's Power Rangers video game, there was a Ninja Turtles video game on the NES. I later found out Batman. It wasn't just like first party Nintendo things. Other things got video games for it as well. But yeah, man, Super Mario Brothers started all for me. I would play with my mom and aunts occasionally when I learned that there was a second player mode. I learned who Luigi was, and all that good stuff, which was just AKA Green Mario. That's literally when it all started. We were too young, like, oh hey, it's Mario. Oh hey, it's Green Mario. I'm like, that's Luigi. Like, nah, it just looks like Mario, but he's green. But yeah, and of course later on, I learned about the sequels, that it had sequels, and I was like, wow, they made more of this game. This is great. Family and friends would show me the secrets, like the one-ups, the tunnels that actually got you the coins, the things I had no idea existed. At this point, they were just all muscle memory. But yeah, this was a new world for me. Actually being able to control what was on the TV was just like earth-shattering. I didn't even know such a form of entertainment even existed. And I don't know if it was just the game connecting specific neurons in my head, but I actually started kindergarten a year earlier than my friends and graduated at age 17 because I was able to start school so young, thanks to like some like test I passed when I was like 4 or 5. And, I don't know. Well, as time went on, of course, I researched it, and it appears that video games did connect, a lot of specific like muscle memory neurons that usually don't develop later on. But since I've like literally started from an early age of playing video games and played them a lot, I was able to have like really great long-term memory. I still remember like a lot of stuff to this day, honestly, from way, 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 way back then. Like, of course, I don't remember anything and everything. Just big life events, like what I got for Christmas, when I got my first bike, stuff like that. And like, I remember stupid things, like the first time I had, Big Red soda, like, I don't know, it was just crazy. But yeah, this game brought so much to the industry and so much to Nintendo and to the franchise itself. And I was there to witness the origin, of, how the modern industry got its start, how Nintendo kind of like got its start in the gaming, and I lived through the relevance of its entire life of existing. I saw, got to play Super Mario Bros. 2, Super Mario Bros. 3, seeing commercials and ads for like Super Mario Bros. 3, Super Mario World, Super Mario 64, and it was truly an honor to see that this franchise grow. But the first one still remains the most purchased game for me personally, and it is the game I play at least once a month just for giggles. It still remains one of the original NES games I have yet to beat. I beat Zelda, I beat Metroid, those games were awesome. I just had to get like, an additional map from Google Maps, whatnot, just kind of look it up just to kind of get the thing going. But I never made a point to gain the like exact muscle memory to beat the Super Mario Brothers. It was just a simple platforming game. So it was so popular, man. It had catchy tunes, it's timeless. They're still used in the modern games today, obviously. They still remix them. And then, of course, the power-ups, that was really cool. To get the mushroom, get the fire flower, get the stars. I was never able to pinpoint why, like, we as, like, consumers or gamers or kids went ape nuts over this game and loved it so much back then. It was, like, unbeatable. But I definitely fell for its alluring charm, just like everybody else. It was the game that started it off for me and for most of my generation, honestly. And almost everybody I knew had a copy. Like, if you had an NES, you had Super Mario Brothers. This franchise remains one of the best gaming series of all times, even today. It's still one of the top-selling video game franchises of all time, even today. And even though Mario was in games before this, you had like, the other one, the arcade game with the pipes and everything, he was never as impactful to us until this game. I mean, of course, he was in the Donkey Kong game, but it's just, dude, the Super Mario Brothers was like just set him into the timeless like history books. And I still remain a fan of the Mario series and owe him many of thanks for the great experiences for the duration of my entire life. He was one of my day ones, I guess you could say. As far back as I can remember, I remember Mario. And a real rider, a true day one-er. And of course, the most impactful game in my entire life for this, Nintendo fanboy. This not only started the path as a gamer, but this, started a path for many things that still leave me passionate about today. Like, honestly, if it wasn't for this game, I wouldn't be a content creator. I probably wouldn't be so hardcore about Nintendo. I mean, there was other games along the way that did it, but this was the one that opened the door for me for all Nintendo things. So, I mean, I definitely gotta say thank you, Super Mario Brothers. You were literally one of the best experiences in gaming that I've ever experienced in all of my life. And yeah, man, just, I don't know, like, such a simple game, yet such amazing perfection that, honestly will probably be remembered several decades from now as one of the Mona Lisas of art, basically. I honestly think it's going to be considered something to that extent, like later on, and like after we're all dead and gone, like this game will be the game that people remember, people talk about, and just like video games as a history, I feel like no other game has left such an impact on a generation and on the industry as the original Super Mario Bros. Game. But anyway, guys, I think I've talked long enough. This video is already almost 2 hours long, so let's go ahead and just wrap it up because I can go on forever, especially when it's about video games. Well, there you have it, guys. Top 10 for me in terms of my youthful games that I loved and cared about. I mean, surprisingly, some got into the top 5 spot that weren't Nintendo. I know some probably kind of skipped in front of it just to see what those were. I mean, it was a hard list to pick. Like, it was just so heavily debated. Like, it was just such a huge like thing for me to really think about and really put some thought into it. So, I mean, that was just it. Like I said, you kind of had your, Super Mario Brothers 3, of course, the original Mario Brothers being top dog, because that was the one that just started for me all together, just like from point A to point B. Like, Mario was there from day one. That is literally the first memory I ever have, was playing Super Mario Brothers for the very first time and just being all about it. From then on, that's kind of like birthed everything. Like I said, the Nintendo 64, PlayStation 1 era was really big, so that's kind of like, that was like my transition periods from kids to teenagers, so a lot of games really like kind of hit home for me there. I mean, just making this video in general was like super nostalgic. It's Star Fox, Super Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, Metal Gear Solid being number 5. I mean, that's still like one of my best favorite all-time games. I mean, I don't really like any other Metal Gear game. Like, I've tried some here and there, and they never just kind of like grabbed me and kept my interest long enough. Not like the first game ever did. I don't know what it was. I haven't played any Metal Gear or Hideo Kojima games since. But that one just, to me, to this day, like, when I was making this video capturing game footage, I just kept playing it. Like, as soon as I hit the stop record button, I was like, oh, all right, let me get a little further. Okay, let me get a little further. Okay, let me get a little further. God, the voice acting is really good in this game. So, like, that was just like, that was just this video took me so far back. I mean, damn, man, like it was quite the like psychological like trip for me, to be honest with you. Like I said, gaming is such a huge passion of mine. I couldn't just do something on top 5. I'd feel like that'd be insulting to like the love I have as a gamer and for video games. I mean, of course, this is not my top 10 favorite list of all time. These are the best games. This is just like the top 10 from my youth. Maybe eventually I'll do a top 10 video games, but again, that's going to be a lot of storyboarding recording. Like honestly, when I saw that meme like 2-3 weeks ago, I like really sat down, wrote several notes, like typed up an essay several times, changed positions, games came, games went. Super Mario World was in there for a long time, but when I really thought about it, did it really deserve it? I just felt like some other games, you know, like Knights of the Old Republic. I just, like so many games, when I started like unlocking all of those memories, I was just like, wow. This was it. Like, you know, this is the list that I was really happy with, and I knew this was it. This is the one. Everything like here is right. It's correct, and the order's correct. I feel strongly about this. And even when I got the list settled down, it was just going through the listings, like which one's 1, which one's 5, which one's 8, stuff like that. But anyway, guys, I've ranted on long enough. June 4th, I am going to be streaming the what's it called, the PlayStation 5 reveal. So if I get this video out before that, please join me for that. If it's already past that date, definitely go look for it. It should be on my Facebook. I'll probably post it on YouTube just to kind of have it there, and of course it'll be posted on my Twitch as well, but hopefully you guys can stay and see that live. But anyway, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and call it a good day, good night, because I can go on and on and on and on and on and on about video games, but we're just gonna stop here because this video is probably already long enough. But anyway, don't forget to like, follow, subscribe. Tell me your top 10, you know, from your youth and childhood in the comments or through my social media. Hit me up on there, and of course, hopefully we'll see you next time. Again, I started working again, so the videos may be coming out a bit slower. I'll try to keep a stream schedule going, but since my shift is 1:30 p.m. to 10 p.m. obviously that cuts into my start time for my stream, so it might not actually happen, but we'll see. I might have to just limit the streaming and work more on videos, who knows. Sadly, I'll let you guys know when things kind of start settling in terms of schedule. I'll let y'all know, and then we'll just go from there. But anyway, guys, for real, peace out this time. Hopefully I'll see you for that PlayStation 5 reveal stream.